There is a reason certain books make people uncomfortable. It is not always because the ideas are wrong. Sometimes it is because the ideas expose something people would rather leave hidden. The 48 Laws of Power is one of those books. What makes it so unsettling is not simply the discussion of power. History has always been filled with people seeking power. Kings wanted it, politicians wanted it, business leaders wanted it, revolutionaries wanted it. Even ordinary people, in quieter ways, have wanted influence, recognition, respect, and control over their circumstances. What makes this book different is that it attempts to pull the curtain back. It asks you to look beyond what people say and begin paying attention to what they actually do. We live in a world where people like to believe that human relationships operate primarily on honesty, fairness, and good intentions. We are taught that if you work hard, behave well, tell the truth, and treat everyone with respect, life will naturally reward you. These principles can be valuable, but they are not the entire story. Human beings are complicated. We have ambitions we do not announce, insecurities we hide, desires we barely understand, and fears that influence our decisions without our conscious permission. People do not always act according to what they claim to value. They often act according to what they fear losing, what they desperately want to gain, and how they want to be perceived. And this is where the book becomes psychologically interesting. It is not merely teaching you how to gain influence. It is forcing you to recognize that influence already exists around you. Think about the workplace. Two people can have equal intelligence, equal qualifications, and equal talent, yet one consistently receives opportunities while the other is overlooked. Why? Sometimes the difference is not competence, it is perception. One person understands how decisions are made, how relationships function, how reputation spreads, and how timing affects opportunity. The other assumes that simply doing excellent work will automatically speak for itself, but excellence does not always speak for itself. Someone has to notice it, someone has to remember it, someone has to trust it, someone has to believe that giving you responsibility will benefit them. That is power operating beneath the surface, and once you understand this, you begin to see social situations differently. You stop listening only to words. You begin watching patterns. Who interrupts whom? Who becomes silent when a certain person enters the room? Who receives attention without asking for it? Who constantly seeks approval? Who becomes defensive when challenged? Who gives compliments freely and who uses them strategically? Who talks about loyalty but disappears when circumstances become difficult? These observations are not about becoming paranoid, they are about becoming conscious. There is a major difference between paranoia and awareness. Paranoia assumes everyone is against you. Awareness understands that everyone has motives. That distinction matters. If you assume everyone is your enemy, you will become bitter, suspicious, and eventually isolated. But if you assume everyone is completely transparent and predictable, you become vulnerable. Wisdom exists somewhere between those extremes. You learn to observe without immediately judging. You learn to listen without immediately reacting. You learn to understand people's incentives before deciding how to respond to them. This is one of the deepest ideas behind the laws of power. People are rarely motivated by only one thing. A person may tell you they want success, but perhaps what they really want is recognition. Another may claim they want freedom while secretly fearing responsibility. Someone may criticize another person's ambition because they genuinely disagree with it, or because that ambition reminds them of what they have failed to pursue themselves. Human behavior often has layers. The inexperienced observer reacts to the surface. The strategic observer searches for the motive beneath the surface. And once you begin studying motives, you become much harder to manipulate. because manipulation often depends upon your inability to see what is happening. Someone knows you desperately want approval, so they withhold it. Someone knows you fear conflict, so they push your boundaries. Someone knows you need recognition, so they flatter you. Someone knows you cannot tolerate being misunderstood, so they provoke you until you begin explaining yourself. The trap is not always in what they say. The trap is in knowing which psychological button to press. This is why self-awareness becomes the foundation of power. If you do not understand your own weaknesses, other people eventually will. And once they understand them, they do not need to control your entire life. They only need to discover which reaction they can reliably produce. That is why emotional discipline matters so much. Imagine someone insulting you. Your first instinct may be to defend yourself. You explain, you argue, you prove that they are wrong, you give them evidence, you demand that they understand your intentions. But look at what just happened. They made a statement, and you surrendered control of your attention. They created an emotional disturbance, and you allowed them to determine your behavior. The person who provokes you has not necessarily defeated you. But if they can repeatedly determine your emotional state, they have discovered a form of power over you. This is why the laws of power should not be understood merely as tricks for dominating others. They can also be understood as a mirror. They force you to ask uncomfortable questions. Why do I need everyone to understand me? Why do I react so quickly? Why do I reveal my plans before they are complete? Why do I seek validation from people who do not respect me? Why do I become emotionally invested in proving myself to people who have already decided what they think of me? These questions are far more important than memorizing 48 rules, because the deepest form of power begins when you stop being unconscious. You begin noticing the game. You begin recognizing incentives. You begin understanding perception. You begin observing your own emotional patterns. And perhaps most importantly, you stop assuming that every situation must be handled through immediate action. Sometimes the most strategic move is to wait. Sometimes it is to say nothing. Sometimes it is to walk away. Sometimes it is to let another person reveal themselves without interference. The world constantly pressures you to react. Social media rewards outrage, arguments reward aggression, insecure people demand explanations, competitive environments encourage comparison. But the person who can pause has an advantage, because a pause creates distance between stimulus and response. And inside that distance is choice. That is where strategy begins. The real danger is not that you know too little about power. The real danger is that you may be participating in power dynamics every day without realizing it. You may be giving away influence without noticing. You may be revealing your intentions too quickly. You may be allowing other people's opinions to dictate your emotional state. You may be confusing kindness with weakness, aggression with strength, or visibility with importance. The purpose of understanding power is not to become cruel, it is to become awake, because once you see the invisible patterns, you can finally decide which ones deserve your participation. And that is the first lesson. You cannot navigate a game effectively while pretending the game does not exist. And once you begin to see the invisible game, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Power is rarely demonstrated through noise. More often, it is demonstrated through control. Think about the people who constantly need to prove themselves. They speak louder when challenged. They interrupt. They defend every decision. They explain themselves before anyone has even accused them of anything. They need everyone in the room to know how intelligent, important, successful, or capable they are. At first glance, this can look like confidence, but confidence does not need constant advertising. There is a psychological difference between possessing power and performing power. The person who constantly performs strength is often revealing how much they need other people to believe in it. The person who genuinely possesses inner stability can afford to be quiet. This is one of the most important lessons hidden inside the study of power. Your emotional reactions communicate information. Every reaction tells people something about you. Anger can reveal what threatens your ego. Defensiveness can reveal what you are insecure about. Excessive enthusiasm can reveal what you desperately want. Constant explanation can reveal that you need approval. Impatience can reveal that you feel out of control. This does not mean you should become emotionless. That is impossible and, frankly, unnecessary. The goal is not to destroy emotion. The goal is to prevent emotion from becoming your master. You can feel anger without becoming angry in your behavior. You can feel fear without allowing fear to make your decisions. You can feel insulted without immediately demanding revenge. You can feel the desire to prove yourself without actually proving anything. That small separation between feeling and action is where psychological strength begins. Imagine someone deliberately tries to embarrass you in front of others. The instinctive response is immediate. Defend yourself. You want to correct the story. You want to expose the other person's hypocrisy. You want everyone watching to understand that you are not weak. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what does the other person actually want? Perhaps they want you angry. Perhaps they want you to lose composure. Perhaps they want you to overreact so they can portray you as unstable. Perhaps they simply want attention. Whatever the motive, your immediate emotional reaction may give them exactly what they wanted. This is why composure can be more powerful than confrontation. When you refuse to provide the expected reaction, you interrupt the psychological script. The person who expected anger receives calm. The person who expected an argument receives silence. The person who expected an explanation receives none. Suddenly, the dynamic changes. You are no longer following their rhythm. You are choosing your own. This principle extends far beyond insults. In negotiations, the person who becomes desperate to close the deal can lose leverage. In relationships, the person terrified of abandonment may tolerate behavior they should never accept. In business, the person obsessed with proving their worth may reveal too much information. In conflict, the person who cannot tolerate uncertainty may make decisions too quickly. In every case, emotional urgency becomes expensive. The person who can remain patient gains something incredibly valuable: time. And time changes perception. When you react instantly, you operate from the first emotion. When you wait, you gain access to information. You see what happens next. You notice who speaks. You notice who remains silent. You notice whether the accusation disappears or escalates. You discover whether someone's behavior was intentional or merely careless. You learn more because you have not prematurely committed yourself to a response. This is why saying less can sometimes communicate more. People often reveal themselves when you stop filling the silence. Consider a conversation where someone makes an ambiguous statement about you. You immediately begin explaining. "I didn't mean that. That isn't what happened. You misunderstood me. I was actually trying to help." And you continue explaining until you have given the other person a detailed map of your fears, intentions, and insecurities. But what happens if you simply pause? You allow silence to exist. The other person may clarify. They may contradict themselves. They may reveal what they actually wanted. Silence creates space for information, and information creates leverage. This is not about playing childish games or deliberately manipulating people. It is about refusing to surrender your psychological center every time someone makes a demand upon your attention. Your attention is one of your most valuable resources. Where your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. If you spend your entire day thinking about people who dislike you, they occupy your mind without paying any rent. If you spend hours trying to convince someone that you are valuable, you have already placed their opinion above your own judgment. If you constantly monitor who respects you, who envies you, who is talking about you, and who has ignored you, you become psychologically dependent on external reactions. And dependency weakens judgment. This is why reputation must be handled carefully. Your reputation is not simply what people say about you. It is the expectation people develop about how you behave. If you are constantly emotional, people learn that provoking you is easy. If you constantly break promises, people learn that your word has little weight. If you constantly reveal your plans, people learn that they can anticipate your moves. If you constantly chase attention, people learn that withdrawing attention is enough to control you. But if you become consistent, composed, and deliberate, something changes. People become less certain about how easily they can move you. That uncertainty can create respect, not fear in the childish sense, not intimidation, respect. The respect that comes from recognizing that another person possesses boundaries, self-command, and a stable sense of identity. This is why the strongest person in the room may not be the one speaking the most. It may be the person watching carefully. The person who does not need to win every argument. The person who can leave an insult unanswered. The person who can hear criticism without immediately becoming defensive. The person who can receive praise without becoming intoxicated by it. The person who can walk away from an opportunity that violates their principles. That kind of strength is difficult to fake because it comes from internal discipline, and internal discipline is built through repetition. Every time you refuse an unnecessary reaction, you strengthen your ability to choose. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you strengthen your independence. Every time you remain calm while another person becomes emotional, you learn that you do not have to borrow someone else's chaos. Eventually, people notice. They begin to understand that your emotions are not public property. They cannot simply press a button and receive a predictable reaction. And that is a profound form of freedom, because when other people cannot easily control your emotional state, they lose one of the simplest ways to control your behavior. So do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake patience for passivity. Do not mistake emotional control for indifference. Sometimes the greatest display of power is the ability to feel everything and still choose your response. But there is one final distinction we have to make, because understanding power can become dangerous when it is misunderstood. The goal is not to become obsessed with controlling everyone around you. The goal is to become difficult to control yourself. There is a temptation, after learning about strategy and human behavior, to start seeing every interaction as a competition. You begin asking, how can I win this conversation? How can I make this person submit? How can I make them fear me? How can I manipulate the situation? But that mindset eventually becomes another form of weakness. Why? Because now other people still control you. They control you through your need to defeat them. If someone insults you and your immediate objective becomes destroying them, they have already entered your mind. If someone rejects you and your entire purpose becomes proving them wrong, they still occupy your attention. If someone succeeds and your first instinct is to bring them down, their success has already determined your emotional state. Real power requires something deeper. It requires the ability to choose your battles. Not every insult deserves an answer. Not every disagreement deserves a debate. Not every person deserves access to your plans. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. And not every enemy deserves to know that you consider them an enemy. This is where the study of power becomes a study of self-mastery. You begin to understand that strategy is not simply about knowing what to do. It is also about knowing what not to do. That distinction separates impulse from intelligence. An impulsive person reacts to everything. A strategic person evaluates. An impulsive person needs immediate satisfaction. A strategic person can tolerate temporary discomfort for a better long-term outcome. An impulsive person wants everyone to understand them. A strategic person understands that being misunderstood is sometimes unavoidable. This is difficult because human beings naturally crave recognition. We want people to see our intentions correctly. We want our efforts acknowledged. We want our enemies exposed and our friends loyal, but life rarely gives us that perfect arrangement. People will misunderstand you. People will underestimate you. People will sometimes take credit for your work. People will sometimes judge you without knowing the full story, and if your emotional stability depends upon correcting every misunderstanding, you will spend your life defending yourself. There comes a point where you must ask a different question. Does this actually matter? That question can save you years. Because not every battle has equal value. Some conflicts protect your future. Others merely protect your ego. Learn the difference. Your ego wants immediate victory. Wisdom wants lasting freedom. Imagine someone attempts to provoke you publicly. Your ego says, you cannot let them get away with that. Wisdom asks, what happens if I respond? Perhaps the argument becomes bigger. Perhaps other people become involved. Perhaps you reveal information that should have remained private. Perhaps you damage your reputation trying to protect it. Perhaps you spend the next 3 days thinking about an interaction that lasted 3 minutes. What did you gain? Sometimes you gain nothing, and that is why restraint is not surrender. Restraint is calculation. You are not refusing to act because you are powerless. You are refusing to act because the action does not serve your larger objective. This is one of the most important principles you can take from any serious study of power. Never confuse movement with progress. People love action because action creates the feeling of control. But sometimes doing something is precisely how you lose control. You send the angry message, you reveal the secret, you announce the plan too early, you confront someone before understanding the situation. You accept an offer because you are afraid another one will never come. You respond to criticism because you cannot tolerate silence. In each case, action provides immediate emotional relief, but relief is not the same as wisdom. The mature mind learns to tolerate uncertainty. It can sit with unanswered questions. It can wait before making commitments. It can observe before judging. It can keep a plan private until the right moment, and this is where the deeper value of the laws lies. They should not become a costume. You do not need to become cold, calculating, or suspicious. You do not need to manipulate every person you meet. Instead, use strategic knowledge as a shield. If you understand how flattery works, you become less vulnerable to it. If you understand how guilt can be used as leverage, you become more capable of setting boundaries. If you understand how envy operates, you become more careful about unnecessary displays of success. If you understand how reputation develops, you become more deliberate about your behavior. If you understand how emotional reactions expose vulnerabilities, you become more disciplined about what you reveal. Knowledge becomes protection, and perhaps this is the healthiest way to approach a book about power. Do not ask only, how can I use this against other people? Ask, how can this prevent other people from using these tactics against me? That question changes everything. Because suddenly the book is no longer simply about gaining influence. It is about developing psychological immunity. You become harder to flatter, harder to provoke, harder to rush, harder to guilt, harder to intimidate, harder to manipulate, and that does not make you less human. It makes your choices more conscious. There is another important lesson here. You do not have to announce your transformation. If you become more disciplined, you do not need to tell everyone. If you become more valuable, you do not need to advertise it constantly. If you develop a new strategy, you do not need to reveal it before you have acted. Let your behavior communicate what your words no longer need to explain. There is enormous strength in becoming less dependent on external validation. When you no longer need applause, you become freer. When you no longer need to win every argument, you become calmer. When you no longer need everyone to like you, you become capable of making difficult decisions. When you no longer need to prove your worth, you can focus on building it. That is the paradox. The more desperately you chase power, the more obvious your weakness becomes. But the more you develop yourself, the less you need to announce your power. You become valuable because you are capable. You become respected because you are consistent. You become difficult to manipulate because you understand yourself. And eventually, you stop asking, "How do I control them?" You start asking, "How do I control myself?" That is the question that changes everything. Because you can influence another person today and lose that influence tomorrow. You can win an argument and still lose the relationship. You can defeat an opponent and create another enemy. You can manipulate someone and eventually destroy their trust. But self-mastery compounds. Every disciplined decision strengthens the next one. Every boundary teaches you to respect yourself. Every controlled reaction increases your freedom. Every unnecessary battle you refuse preserves your energy for something meaningful. And this is where the real lesson of power becomes clear. The most dangerous person is not the person who knows every trick. It is the person who understands human behavior, but remains governed by principles. Someone who can see the game without becoming consumed by it. Someone who can recognize manipulation without becoming manipulative. Someone who can understand power without worshipping it. Someone who can walk through a room filled with ambition, ego, envy, and competition, and still remain centered. That is the kind of power that does not need to announce itself. So read the laws, study them, question them. Observe them in history, business, relationships, and your own behavior, but do not become a prisoner of them. Use knowledge to become more conscious, not more cynical. Use strategy to protect your freedom, not to destroy someone else's. And above all, remember this.